That September morning, rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown Seattle apartment, each droplet like a tiny fist demanding entry into my carefully constructed solitude. I stood there, coffee growing cold in my hands, watching the city blur into impressionist smears of gray and amber. The invitation lay on my granite countertop, its elegant script mocking me with every serif. David and Sarah request the honor of your presence. My brother's wedding. The golden boy's moment of triumph, funded by parents who saw his engagement as an investment in their social standing, while my own achievements had always been met with polite indifference. I am Marcus Chen, 34 years old, and for most of my life, I existed in the shadow of my younger brother David's seemingly effortless success. Where David glided through law school with our parents' unwavering support, I scraped through business school with student loans and weekend jobs. Where David's achievements were celebrated with family dinners and proud phone calls to relatives, my accomplishments were acknowledged with distracted nods over morning coffee. The pattern had been so consistent, so ingrained in our family's DNA, that I'd almost stopped noticing the sting. Almost. The weight of that invitation in my hands felt heavier than paper should. Sarah Montgomery, David's fiancée, came from old Seattle money. Her family owned half the waterfront, and their approval of David had elevated him to heights I'd never imagined possible. Our parents, Margaret and Robert Chen, had transformed from modest middle-class citizens into society wannabes overnight, reveling in their connection to the Montgomery fortune. The wedding was to be held at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, with 500 guests, a live orchestra, and enough flowers to stock a greenhouse. The budget, I'd overheard during a tense family dinner last month, was approaching $200,000. My phone buzzed against the counter, jolting me from my reverie. Mom's contact photo smiled up at me, a picture from David's law school graduation, where she beamed beside him while I stood awkwardly to the side. "Marcus, honey, we need to talk about your speech for David's wedding." Her voice carried that particular tone she used when discussing anything related to my brother, a mixture of excitement and maternal pride that never quite extended to conversations about my life. My speech? I set down my coffee, watching the rain create rivers down the glass. I didn't know I was giving one. "Of course you are. You're the best man's brother. It's expected." The correction stung. Not the best man, not the brother worthy of that honor. That distinction belonged to David's college roommate, Jonathan, whose trust fund and country club connections made him a more suitable choice. I was simply the best man's brother, a biological accident of birth order that couldn't be edited out of the family narrative. "Mom, I don't think—" "We've already told the Montgomerys you'll speak. Don't make this difficult, Marcus. This wedding is important for David's future, for all our futures." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in my hand. This wedding is important for David's future. The phrase echoed in my mind as I returned to the window, watching pedestrians navigate the Seattle drizzle with practiced indifference. When had my own future stopped being important? When had I become a supporting character in the Chen family story? I thought back to my own engagement 3 years ago, to Emma Rodriguez, a brilliant marketing executive I'd met at a tech conference. When I'd brought her home to meet my parents, the conversation had lasted exactly 47 minutes before my father excused himself to watch the news and my mother began discussing David's latest promotion at the law firm. Emma had squeezed my hand under the table, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of sympathy and confusion that I'd found both comforting and humiliating. Our wedding had been a simple affair, 50 guests at a boutique hotel in Capitol Hill, with my parents attending, but somehow managing to seem absent, even while physically present. My father had checked his phone during our vows. My mother had spent the reception comparing our modest celebration to a Montgomery cousin's lavish affair she'd read about in Seattle Magazine. Emma and I had divorced 18 months later, the strain of building a life together while I wrestled with feeling perpetually inadequate, finally taking its toll. She'd been kind about it, even understanding, but I'd seen the relief in her eyes when I'd suggested we separate. Nobody wanted to be married to a man who couldn't figure out his own worth. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my marriage had crumbled, my business had flourished. Chen Digital Solutions had grown from a one-man operation run from my spare bedroom to a company employing 43 people across 2 offices. We specialized in helping traditional businesses navigate digital transformation, unsexy work that generated impressive profit margins and satisfied clients who signed multi-year contracts. But success in business, I'd learned, didn't translate to recognition at family dinners. David's legal victories made for better storytelling than my quarterly revenue reports. His courtroom theatrics played better than my methodical client presentations. He was the protagonist, I was the subplot. My laptop chimed with an incoming email, and I reluctantly tore my attention from the rain-soaked city. The sender's name made my pulse quicken. Rebecca Walsh, senior partner at Walsh & Associates, the boutique investment firm that had been courting me for 3 months. Marcus, final offer attached. This is our best and final. Decision needed by Friday. The Hendricks Group won't wait longer. Rebecca. I opened the attachment with trembling fingers, though I'd memorized the numbers during our last meeting. The Hendricks Group, a private equity firm based in San Francisco, wanted to acquire Chen Digital Solutions. The offer was for $37 million, $18 million up front, with the remainder paid out over 3 years as I transitioned my role and helped integrate my company into their larger portfolio. $37 million. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred together, rain continuing its assault on the windows. 3 months ago, when Rebecca had first approached me, the offer had seemed surreal, impossible. The Hendricks Group had been tracking my company's growth, impressed by our client retention rates and the proprietary software platforms we'd developed. They wanted to acquire us as the cornerstone of their new Pacific Northwest Digital Services division. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, or more ironic. David's wedding was in 11 days. The signed contracts could be in Hendricks' hands by Monday, with the initial payment transferred by Wednesday. I could attend my brother's lavish celebration as something I'd never been before in my family's eyes, the successful one. But there was a catch, as there always is with these things. Rebecca had been clear. Hendricks wanted a decision by Friday, and they wanted me to stay on as president of their new division for at least 2 years. It was a good offer, fair terms, and exactly the kind of opportunity I'd worked toward for 8 years. So why was I hesitating? My phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed David's name beside a photo from last Christmas, where he wore an expensive sweater our parents had bought him while I'd received a gift card to Best Buy. Marcus, Mom said she talked to you about the speech. That's awesome, man. I really appreciate you doing this. David's voice carried its usual easy confidence, the tone of someone who'd never doubted that the world would arrange itself for his convenience. Yeah, about that. I know it's not really your thing, the public speaking stuff, but it would mean a lot to Sarah and me, and Mom's been talking about it to Mrs. Montgomery, so... He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. I was expected to perform, to play my role in the Chen family's presentation to Seattle society. David, can I ask you something? Sure, what's up? I hesitated, watching rain streak down the glass in patterns that reminded me of tears. Do you remember when I got engaged to Emma? A pause. Of course, that was a nice ceremony you guys had. Do you remember giving a speech at my wedding? Another pause, longer this time. Well, you guys kept it pretty small, right? I mean, it was more intimate. He hadn't given a speech, hadn't even offered. In fact, I could barely remember him being there at all, despite the photos that proved his attendance. He'd spent most of the reception networking with Emma's colleagues, treating my wedding like a business development opportunity. Right, I said quietly. Intimate. But this is different, Marcus. This is bigger, you know? Sarah's family, they do things a certain way, and Mom really wants us to make a good impression. Us? Well, me, obviously, but the whole family. We're representing the Chen name now, the Chen name. As if our family had some kind of legacy to uphold, some tradition of excellence that David was carrying forward while what was I doing? Apparently, I was giving speeches to help my brother impress his in-laws. I'll think about it, I told him. Think about it, Marcus, it's not really optional. I mean, you're my brother. And there it was, the fundamental assumption that had governed our relationship for 34 years. I was his brother, which meant I was expected to support, to celebrate, to step aside when necessary for his advancement. The role was clearly defined, and I'd been playing it so long that nobody questioned whether I might want something different. "I'll think about it," I repeated, and hung up before he could respond. The rain was lessening now, individual droplets becoming visible against the gray sky. I returned to my laptop and Rebecca's email, reading the acquisition terms one more time. The Hendricks Group wasn't just buying my company. They were betting on my leadership, my vision for digital transformation in traditional industries. They'd done their due diligence, reviewed our client testimonials, analyzed our profit margins and growth projections. They'd seen value where my own family saw, what? A hobby that paid well? My intercom buzzed. "Mr. Chen, your 2 o'clock is here." Jennifer Kim, my operations manager, was early for our quarterly review. I minimized the email and tried to shift my focus to business, but the weight of the Hendricks decision settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. "Send her in." Jennifer entered with her usual purposeful stride, tablet in hand, and that expression of organized efficiency that made her indispensable. At 28, she was everything I'd been at her age, ambitious, focused, and determined to prove herself in a world that seemed designed to overlook people who didn't fit traditional success narratives. "The Q3 numbers are strong." She began without preamble, settling into the chair across from my desk. Revenue up 18%, client satisfaction scores holding steady at 94%, and we've got 6 new prospect meetings scheduled for next month. I nodded, trying to focus on her presentation while my mind drifted to David's wedding, to my parents' expectations, to the check that could be sitting in my account by next Wednesday. "Marcus?" Jennifer's voice cut through my distraction. "Are you okay? You seem distracted." "Yeah, I know." I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention. "Jennifer, can I ask you something personal?" She raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Do you think success means anything if the people closest to you don't recognize it?" The question hung in the air between us, more vulnerable than I'd intended. Jennifer set down her tablet and studied my face with the same analytical attention she gave our quarterly reports. "Is this about your family?" I'd mentioned them before, usually in the context of explaining why I wouldn't be attending various family functions that conflicted with business trips or client meetings. Jennifer had met them once, at last year's holiday party, and I'd noticed her watching my parents' interaction with David, the way they lit up when he arrived, the obvious pride in their voices when they introduced him to my employees. "My brother's getting married," I said. "Big wedding. Expensive. My parents are very invested in making sure everything goes perfectly." "And you're not?" "I'm not invited to participate. I'm invited to perform." Jennifer nodded slowly, recognition flickering in her eyes. "The successful brother? The golden brother. Everything he touches turns to gold, at least in their eyes. Harvard Law, prestigious firm, perfect fiancé from old money family. I'm the backup plan who accidentally did okay for himself." "Accidentally?" Jennifer's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Marcus, you built this company from nothing. Our clients don't sign 6-figure contracts by accident. The Hendricks Group doesn't offer 9-figure acquisitions by accident." The Hendricks Group. I'd been so careful not to mention the acquisition to anyone at the company yet, not wanting to create uncertainty until I'd made a decision. But Jennifer's words hit me with unexpected force. They were offering $37 million for something I'd built from nothing, working 18-hour days in a cramped apartment while David glided through law school on our parents' dime. "How did you know about Hendricks?" Jennifer's cheeks flushed slightly. "Rebecca Walsh called this morning. She said she'd been trying to reach you and wanted to make sure you'd received her email. I told her I'd pass along the message." I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "So my operations manager knows about the biggest decision of my career before my own family." "Have you told them?" "About what?" "The acquisition? The fact that their disappointing older son just got offered more money than they'll see in 5 lifetimes?" I shook my head. "It wouldn't matter. David's wedding is the only thing that matters right now. Everything else is just background noise." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her tablet. "You know what I think?" "Tell me." "I think you're scared. The words hit me like cold water. Scared of what? Scared of what happens when you stop being the disappointment, when you stop being the supporting character in their story and become the protagonist of your own. I stared at her, this 28-year-old woman who'd apparently seen through me more clearly than I'd seen through myself. That's quite an analysis. It's true, though, isn't it? You've built your whole identity around being underestimated. If you sign with Hendrix, if you become the success story, then what's your excuse for staying in the shadows? The rain had stopped completely now, leaving Seattle's skyline sharp and clear against the gray sky. I could see Elliott Bay in the distance, container ships moving with deliberate purpose toward destinations I could only imagine. My brother's wedding is next Saturday, I said finally. Congratulations to him. My parents want me to give a speech about family, about supporting each other, about how proud we all are of David's success. Are you? Proud of his success? I considered the question seriously. David was talented, charming, and genuinely good at his job. His success wasn't undeserved, even if it had been supported by advantages I'd never enjoyed. Yes, I said honestly. I am proud of him, but I'm tired of that being the only thing I'm allowed to feel. Jennifer gathered her papers and stood to leave, but paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you should sign with Hendrix. Not because of your family, not because of your brother's wedding, but because you've earned it. And maybe it's time the people in your life started recognizing that. After she left, I sat alone in my office, watching the afternoon light shift across Seattle's skyline. The Hendrix offer remained open on my laptop screen. Numbers that represented not just money, but validation from people who understood the value of what I'd built. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Fitted the tux for David's wedding. You're picking yours up Thursday. Black tie, 6 p.m. ceremony. Don't be late. Not are you available Thursday or what works for your schedule. Just the assumption that I would arrange my life around David's wedding, as I'd always done. The supporting character, dutifully playing his role. I thought about Jennifer's words, about being scared to stop being the disappointment. Was that really what I was doing? Had I become so comfortable being overlooked that I'd forgotten how to step into the light? The acquisition documents were still open on my screen. $37 million. 2 years as president of Hendrix Pacific Northwest Division. My name on the letterhead of one of the most respected digital transformation companies on the West Coast. I reached for my phone and dialed Rebecca Walsh's number. Rebecca, it's Marcus Chen. Marcus, I was hoping to hear from you. Have you had a chance to review the terms? I have. I want to move forward, but I need to adjust the timeline. A pause. Adjust how? I need the deal signed and the first payment transferred by next Friday. Can Hendrix move that fast? That's aggressive, but possible, yes. They've been waiting for your decision for 3 months. If you're ready to commit, I can have their legal team working over the weekend. Her voice carried new energy, the excitement of a deal coming together. What changed your mind? I looked out at the Seattle skyline, at the city where I'd built something valuable enough to attract the attention of a major private equity firm. I realized I was tired of waiting for permission to be successful. I'll call Hendrix now. We'll have documents ready for review by tomorrow morning. After hanging up, I sat in the gathering dusk of my office, watching lights begin to twinkle across the city. In 6 days, I would attend my brother's wedding as a very different person than the one my family expected to see. Not the supporting character, not the disappointment who'd accidentally done okay for himself, but the CEO who'd just sold his company for 9 figures. The irony was delicious. My parents would spend David's wedding celebration talking about his promising future, his advantageous marriage, his bright prospects. They had no idea that their overlooked older son had just secured a future that dwarfed anything David's legal career could offer. But this wasn't about the money, not really. It was about stepping out of the shadows I'd inhabited for 34 years and claiming the recognition I'd earned. It was about refusing to give a speech celebrating my brother's success while my own achievements went unacknowledged. It was about rewriting the family narrative, whether they were ready for it or not. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from David. Marcus, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about Emma's wedding. His voice carried an uncertainty I'd rarely heard from him. I should have given a speech then. That was wrong of me. The apology caught me off guard. David, no, let me finish. I know I haven't always been the best brother. I get caught up in my own stuff, and I forget that you've got your own life, your own achievements. But this wedding, Marcus, it's really important to me. Having you there, having you speak, it would mean everything. I listened to my brother's words, hearing genuine emotion beneath his usual confidence. This was David being vulnerable, something I'd seen so rarely that it almost changed my mind about everything. Almost. I'll be there, I told him, and I'll give a speech. But David, it's going to be on my terms. What do you mean? You'll find out. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp September clarity that made Seattle feel like the most beautiful city in the world. I stood in Rebecca Walsh's conference room, surrounded by lawyers and documents, signing my name to papers that would fundamentally change my life. The Hendricks Group had moved with impressive speed, their legal team working through the weekend to finalize terms. The first payment, $18 million, would be transferred to my accounts within hours. The remaining $19 million would follow over the next 2 years as I helped integrate Chen Digital Solutions into their larger operation. "Congratulations, Marcus," said James Hendricks himself, who'd flown up from San Francisco for the signing. "We're excited to have you leading our Pacific Northwest expansion." I shook his hand, marveling at how different this felt from any other business meeting I'd ever attended. This wasn't about quarterly reports or client renewals. This was about validation, about being recognized as someone worth betting on. "The announcement will go out Monday," Rebecca said, gathering the signed documents. "Business Journal, TechCrunch, the usual outlets. Are you ready for the attention?" I thought about David's wedding tomorrow, about my parents' expectations, about the speech I'd been asked to give. I think so. My phone had been buzzing all morning with calls from my family. The tux fitting, the rehearsal dinner details, the seating chart complications that apparently required my input. I'd ignored them all, focused on the signatures and initials that were remaking my life one page at a time. Now, walking back to my office with signed copies of the acquisition agreement in my briefcase, I finally returned my mother's calls. "Marcus, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you all morning." Her voice carried the particular stress she reserved for events involving the Montgomery family. "The rehearsal dinner is tonight at 7. You need to be there by 6:30 for photos." "I'll be there." "And you've prepared your speech for tomorrow?" I smiled, looking out at Elliott Bay from the backseat of my taxi. "I've prepared something, yes." "Good. Remember, this is about celebrating David and Sarah, about family unity. The Montgomerys will be listening to every word." "I understand perfectly." That evening, I stood in the Fairmont Olympic Hotel's Georgian room, watching my family interact with Sarah's parents in a carefully choreographed dance of social climbing. My mother had changed her hairstyle and bought a new dress for the occasion. My father kept mentioning his golf handicap to Sarah's father, a man who clearly played at courses my father could never afford. David moved through the room with easy confidence, equally comfortable talking to Sarah's Harvard-educated cousins and the federal judges who comprised her father's social circle. He belonged here in a way that I never could, wedding reception or not. "Marcus," Sarah approached with her characteristic warmth, resplendent in a cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I'm so glad you're here. David's been so excited about your speech tomorrow." "Has he? He kept saying you were going to surprise everyone." She laughed, a sound like silver bells. "I can't wait to hear what you've prepared." I studied her face, this beautiful, intelligent woman who genuinely seemed to care about my brother, who'd welcomed me into their circle with kindness I probably didn't deserve. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What do you know about my business?" She tilted her head, considering. "You do something with computers, right? Digital, marketing?" "Digital transformation. I help traditional businesses modernize their operations and customer engagement strategies." "That sounds fascinating." Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, even if her knowledge was limited. "You'll have to tell me more about it sometime." "I sold my company yesterday," I said quietly, "for $37 million. Sarah's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. I'm sorry, what? The Hendricks Group acquired Chen Digital Solutions yesterday morning, largest deal in the Pacific Northwest digital services sector this year. She stared at me, and I watched understanding dawn in her eyes. Marcus, that's incredible. Does David know? Do your parents know? Not yet. I wanted to save the announcement for tomorrow. For your speech? For my speech. Sarah's expression shifted, a mixture of excitement and concern crossing her features. Marcus, tomorrow is David's day. Our day. Please don't. Don't what? Don't finally get recognition for something I've achieved? Don't step out of my brother's shadow for one evening? That's not what I meant. But her voice lacked conviction, and I could see her calculating the impact of my announcement on her perfect wedding reception. Sarah, I've spent my entire life watching my family celebrate David's achievements while treating mine like accidents. Yesterday, I sold a company I built from nothing for more money than most people see in a lifetime. Today, my mother called to remind me not to upstage my brother's wedding with my speech. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving across the room to where David was regaling a group of lawyers with some courtroom anecdote. You're right, she said finally. That's not fair. I'm not trying to ruin your wedding. I'm just tired of being invisible. Sarah nodded slowly. I understand. And Marcus, congratulations. What you've accomplished is extraordinary. The word hit me like a physical blow. Extraordinary. When was the last time anyone in my family had used that word to describe something I'd done? Thank you. Just maybe find a way to share your news that doesn't overshadow our vows. I looked around the room, at my parents posing for photos with Sarah's family, at David holding court with his groomsmen, at the careful choreography of a wedding celebration designed to showcase my brother's ascension into Seattle society. I'll do my best. The next morning, I woke in my downtown apartment to find my phone buzzing with notifications. The first payment from Hendricks had arrived, $18 million that transformed my bank balance from comfortable to incomprehensible. I stared at the numbers on my phone screen, trying to make them feel real. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked the same as always. Slightly rumpled brown hair, tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the face of someone who'd spent more time building businesses than building confidence. But something was different now, something that went deeper than the numbers in my bank account. I was worth something, not just financially, but professionally, personally. The Hendricks Group hadn't offered $37 million out of charity. They'd done their research, analyzed my company's value, bet on my leadership. They'd seen something my own family had missed for 34 years. The wedding ceremony was beautiful, held in the Fairmont's Grand Ballroom, with 500 guests bearing witness to David and Sarah's union. I sat in the third row, watching my brother promise to love and honor the woman who'd become his path to Seattle's social elite. His happiness seemed genuine, and I found myself smiling despite everything. My parents sat in the front row, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, my father recording everything on his phone. They looked proud and grateful, like people who'd won a lottery they'd never expected to enter. The reception began with cocktails on the hotel's terrace, the September evening providing a perfect backdrop of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. I nursed a whiskey and watched my extended family mingle with Sarah's relatives, the two groups maintaining their respective territories while occasionally venturing across social lines. Marcus, my father approached with a man I didn't recognize, both holding glasses of what looked like very expensive scotch. I want you to meet Judge Harrison, Sarah's uncle. He's on the federal circuit court. The judge extended his hand with practiced political grace. Robert's been telling me about his sons. Quite impressive having two such successful boys. I shook his hand, noting how my father's chest puffed with pride. Thank you, Judge Harrison. David's quite the lawyer, from what I hear. Partnership track at Henderson & Associates. That's no small achievement. David's always been exceptional, I agreed. And you're in computers, I understand. Digital transformation consulting, I corrected, though I actually just completed the sale of my company yesterday. Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. Congratulations. I hope it went well for you. $37 million, I said quietly, to the Hendricks Group. The judge's glass stopped moving toward his lips. My father's face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before: confusion, disbelief, and finally, something that might have been awe. 37, my father began. $1 million, I finished. The deal closed yesterday morning. It'll be announced in Monday's business journals. Judge Harrison whistled low under his breath. That's quite substantial, Marcus. Hendricks Group, you said? They're serious players in private equity. Very serious. I'll be staying on as president of their Pacific Northwest Digital Services Division. My father was staring at me like I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Marcus, why didn't you tell us? This is enormous news. I wanted to save it for tonight, for my speech. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like panic. Your speech is supposed to be about David and Sarah. It will be, but it'll also be about family, about supporting each other through success. I took a sip of my whiskey, savoring the burn. About how proud I am to be part of a family where everyone has the chance to achieve extraordinary things. The dinner gong chimed, calling guests to their tables. I excused myself from Judge Harrison and my father, who was still staring at me with that expression of bewildered recalculation. I found my assigned seat at table 7, strategically placed between David's college roommate's wife and one of Sarah's sorority sisters. Not the family table, not the VIP section, but close enough to fulfill my obligations as the groom's brother. The placement felt symbolic of my role in the family hierarchy, important enough to acknowledge, not important enough to feature prominently. The dinner proceeded with practiced elegance, 7 courses, 3 wines, and carefully timed toasts that built toward the main event. David's best man spoke about friendship and loyalty. Sarah's father welcomed my brother into the Montgomery family with words that managed to be both gracious and proprietary. My mother dabbed at her eyes through each speech, overwhelmed by the social significance of the evening. Finally, the master of ceremonies approached the microphone with the words I'd been anticipating all week. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to invite the groom's brother, Marcus Chen, to share a few words about family. I stood, my heart hammering against my ribs, and walked to the front of the grand ballroom. 500 faces turned toward me, including my parents, whose expressions showed a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. David smiled encouragingly from the head table, unaware that the speech he'd requested was about to reshape everything. The microphone felt cold against my hand as I looked out at the assembled guests, Seattle's legal and social elite, my extended family, colleagues from David's firm, and the Montgomery dynasty in all their refined glory. Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Marcus Chen, David's older brother. Polite applause rippled through the room. I've been asked to speak tonight about family, about the bonds that support us through life's challenges and celebrations. I paused, my gaze finding my parents' faces in the crowd. My mother was smiling that proud, expectant smile she wore whenever David was being recognized. My father leaned forward slightly, ready to bask in reflected glory. Family is about recognizing each other's achievements, celebrating each other's successes, and never taking for granted the people who matter most. More nods, more smiles. This was the speech they'd expected, the gracious tribute to family unity that would enhance David's reputation with his new in-laws. My brother David has always been exceptional. Harvard Law, prestigious firm, beautiful wife from a distinguished family. My parents have every right to be proud of the man he's become. David raised his champagne glass in acknowledgement, his smile warm and genuine. But tonight I want to talk about something else. Something I learned yesterday, actually, about the importance of not just giving support, but recognizing when support is offered in return. A slight shift in the room's energy, people sensing a change in tone. Yesterday morning, I completed the sale of my company, Chen Digital Solutions, to the Hendricks Group for $37 million. The silence was immediate and absolute. 500 people went completely still, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips, conversations dying mid-sentence. I could see my parents' faces clearly from the podium. My mother's mouth had fallen open. My father was gripping his napkin like a lifeline. It was the largest acquisition in the Pacific Northwest digital services sector this year, and I'll be staying on as president of Hendrick's new division. I kept my voice steady, conversational, as if I were discussing the weather. The announcement will be in Monday's business journals, but I wanted to share the news with family first. Judge Harrison was nodding slowly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Several of the lawyers at David's table were whispering to each other, clearly impressed. Sarah was staring at me with wide eyes, her perfect wedding reception suddenly transformed into something she hadn't planned for. I mention this not to take attention away from David and Sarah's beautiful celebration, but because I realized something important this week. Family isn't just about supporting the people everyone expects to succeed. It's about recognizing success wherever it appears, even when it comes from unexpected directions. My gaze found David's face. He was listening intently, his expression unreadable. For 34 years, I've been the Chen family member who accidentally did well for himself. The older brother who found a way to make a living but never quite achieved the heights everyone expected from David. A few nervous chuckles from people who sensed the undercurrent of tension. But maybe it's time to recognize that success comes in many forms, and that pride shouldn't be rationed based on whose achievements fit our expectations. My mother was crying now, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of joy or distress. My father kept looking between me and the Montgomery table, clearly calculating the social implications of this moment. David, you've achieved everything you set out to accomplish, and you've done it with grace and integrity. Sarah, you're gaining not just a husband, but a partner who will support your own remarkable achievements. I raised my champagne glass, and the room followed suit. But I hope you're also gaining a family that celebrates everyone's success, that recognizes worth wherever it appears. I paused, looking directly at my parents. To David and Sarah, to families that support each other completely, and to the understanding that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who have the most to offer. The applause was thunderous, but it carried a different energy than the polite appreciation that had greeted earlier speeches. People were talking, animated conversations erupting at tables throughout the room. I could hear fragments. 37 million. Hendrick's group. Didn't know he had a brother. I returned to my seat as the master of ceremonies attempted to restore order, calling for the traditional first dance. David and Sarah took the floor, but I noticed that many guests were still looking in my direction, still processing what they'd just heard. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Just saw the news alert. Business Journal posted early online. You're trending on LinkedIn. Holy shit, Marcus. The news was already spreading beyond the Fairmont's ballroom. Digital networks carrying word of the acquisition across Seattle's business community. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the overlooked Chen brother had just sold his company for 9 figures. Marcus. My father appeared beside my chair, his voice tight with control. We need to talk. I followed him to a quiet corner of the terrace where my mother was waiting with tears still streaming down her face. $37 million, she whispered. Marcus, how is that possible? I built successful company, Mom. I've been building it for 8 years, since right after Emma and I got divorced. You never asked about it, never showed much interest, so I stopped mentioning it. But we had no idea it was worth, that it was so. She struggled for words. Successful? Valuable? Worth mentioning at family dinners? I kept my voice gentle, but the words still landed like stones. I tried to share my achievements with you, both of you, but every conversation seemed to come back to David's latest victory, his latest promotion, his bright future. My father was shaking his head slowly. We're proud of you, Marcus. We've always been proud of you. Are you? Or are you proud that I'm finally successful enough to reflect well on the family? The question hung in the September air between us, unanswered because we all knew the truth. They were proud of the $37 million, proud of the Hendricks Group's validation, proud of having a son who could command respect from federal judges and Seattle society. But they'd never been proud of Marcus Chen, the man who'd built something valuable through determination and intelligence, and sheer bloody-minded persistence. This changes things, my mother said finally. Yes, I agreed. It does. We stood in silence, watching the Seattle skyline twinkle beyond Elliott Bay. The wedding reception continued inside, David and Sarah's celebration proceeding despite my unexpected announcement. Music drifted through the open doors, laughter and conversation blending into the soundtrack of a successful social event. "What happens now?" my father asked. "Now I go back to work on Monday as president of Hendricks Pacific Northwest Division. I continue building something valuable, something that matters, and maybe if we're all willing to try, we figure out how to be a family that celebrates everyone's achievements." My mother nodded, wiping at her eyes with a tissue. "We'd like that, Marcus. We'd like to do better." So would I. Later that evening, as the reception wound down and guests began making their farewells, David found me on the terrace. His bow tie was slightly askew, his hair mussed from dancing, but his eyes were clear and serious. "That was quite a speech," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "It was overdue. $37 million, Marcus. Jesus." He shook his head in wonderment. "I had no idea your company was that successful. Would it have mattered if you had?" David was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same careful attention he'd bring to a legal brief. "Probably not," he admitted finally. "I've been pretty self-absorbed, haven't I? We all have our own lives to focus on." "That's a diplomatic way of saying I've been an ass." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mom and Dad used to talk about your business, you know, in the early days when you were just getting started. They were worried about you, about whether you'd be able to make it work. Worried I'd fail? Worried you'd chosen a path that wouldn't lead anywhere. They wanted you to have what I had: security, prestige, a clear trajectory toward success." David loosened his bow tie completely, letting it hang around his neck. "They never imagined you'd end up more successful than me." I studied my brother's profile against the city lights. "Does that bother you? The money? The acquisition?" He shrugged. "Honestly, it's kind of a relief." "A relief? I've been the family success story for so long. It got exhausting. Every holiday, every family dinner, everyone wanting to hear about my latest case, my latest achievement. I love what I do, but sometimes I felt like I was performing instead of just being." The admission surprised me. I'd never considered that David might feel burdened by our parents' expectations, might occasionally resent being the designated golden child. "And now?" I asked. "Now maybe we can both just be brothers, both successful, both trying to figure out our lives, both deserving of respect and attention." He extended his hand toward me. "Congratulations, Marcus. What you've built is extraordinary." I shook his hand, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were meeting as equals. Not the golden child and the disappointment, not the performer and the audience, but two men who'd chosen different paths and found their own versions of success. "Congratulations to you too. Sarah's amazing, and you two are perfect together." "Thanks. She likes you, you know. She told me after your speech that she's excited to get to know you better, to understand your business. She thinks we should do a double date sometime when you're ready to start dating again." The suggestion made me smile. "That sounds nice." We sat in comfortable silence, watching late-night Seattle move around us. Cars crossing bridges, ferries carrying passengers home to distant shores, the city settling into the peaceful rhythm of Saturday night. "Marcus? Yeah? Next time you have big news, don't wait for a wedding speech to share it. Call me. I want to hear about your life, your achievements, your plans. I want to be the brother you deserve. I'd like that." "Good. Because apparently I have a lot of catching up to do if I'm going to understand what a $37 million digital transformation company actually does." I laughed, genuine amusement bubbling up from somewhere deep in my chest. It's going to take more than one conversation. Then we'd better get started. Monday morning arrived with a deluge of phone calls, emails, and meeting requests. The Business Journal had run the acquisition story as their lead article, complete with quotes from James Hendricks about their expansion plans and my role in leading their Pacific Northwest operations. TechCrunch picked up the story, followed by GeekWire, and by noon I was fielding interview requests from reporters who'd never heard of me 48 hours earlier. Jennifer appeared in my office doorway at 2 o'clock, grinning like someone who'd won the lottery. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," she announced. 3 clients want to expand their contracts before we officially transition to Hendricks. Two competitors want to know if we're hiring, and someone from the mayor's office called about appointing you to the Economic Development Committee. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. What did you tell them? That you're in meetings all week, but will start returning calls next Monday. She settled into her usual chair, tablet in hand. Marcus, this is incredible. The whole tech community is talking about the acquisition. People are calling you a visionary. A visionary. 6 months ago, I'd been the Chen family disappointment who'd stumbled into a decent living. Now I was a visionary, leading Pacific Northwest digital transformation. It feels surreal, I admitted. You know what doesn't feel surreal? The respect. People are finally seeing what we've built here, what you've accomplished, and not because of who your family is or who you know, but because of the value you've created. My phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I'd been expecting it since the Business Journal article went live. Marcus, honey, we just saw the newspaper article. The whole front page. Her voice carried an excitement I'd rarely heard directed at my achievements. Mrs. Patterson from down the street called to congratulate us. She said her son's an investment banker, and he was very impressed by the numbers. That's nice, Mom. We were wondering if you'd like to come to dinner on Sunday. Your father wants to hear all about your business, about your plans with this Hendricks company. We realize we haven't been as attentive as we should have been. The invitation was everything I'd wanted for years. Recognition, interest, and acknowledgement that my life and work mattered to my family. But it came wrapped in the knowledge that their attention was prompted by external validation, by seeing my name in the newspaper and my net worth calculated in public. I'd like that, I said anyway. But Mom, yes, I don't want to spend the whole dinner talking about money or acquisitions. I want to talk about the work itself, about what we're building, about why it matters. Can you and Dad handle that? A pause. Of course, honey. We want to understand everything. After hanging up, I stared out at the Seattle skyline, watching clouds drift across Elliott Bay. The city looked different somehow, as if success had changed my perspective along with my bank balance. Or maybe I was just seeing it clearly for the first time, without the filter of feeling perpetually overlooked. My intercom buzzed. Mr. Chen, there's a delivery for you. A courier appeared with an enormous bouquet of flowers and a card that read, "Congratulations on your extraordinary achievement. Looking forward to learning more about digital transformation. Sarah and David." I smiled, setting the flowers on my conference table where their bright colors transformed the corporate space into something more welcoming. Change was happening, slowly but genuinely, in relationships I'd thought were fixed forever. Jennifer poked her head back into my office. One more thing. Rebecca Walsh called. Hendricks wants to schedule a strategy session for Thursday to start planning the integration. They're excited to get started. Thursday works. And Marcus? Congratulations. Really. You've earned every bit of this. That evening, I stood in my apartment, looking out at the same view that had seemed so gray and uncertain just a week earlier. The rain had returned, Seattle's familiar rhythm of water against glass, but it felt different now. Cleansing rather than oppressive, purposeful rather than endless. The acquisition documents were filed, the money was real, and tomorrow I would begin the next phase of my career with one of the most respected private equity firms on the West Coast. But more than that, I'd finally stepped out of the shadows I'd inhabited for 34 years. I thought about David's wedding reception, about the moment when 500 people had suddenly seen me as someone worth paying attention to. The validation had been intoxicating, but it had also been external, dependent on other people's recognition and approval. The real transformation had happened before that, in Rebecca Walsh's conference room, when I'd decided to stop waiting for permission to be successful. When I'd chosen to bet on myself the way Hendricks had bet on my company. My phone rang. The caller ID showed David's name. "Hey, Marcus. Sarah and I just wanted to thank you again for the flowers and for your speech on Saturday. It meant a lot to have you there. Thanks for including me. Actually, I was wondering if you'd want to grab lunch this week. Sarah thinks I should understand your business better, and honestly, I'd like to understand my brother better." I smiled, watching rain create patterns on my windows. I'd like that too. Great. And Marcus, I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. The words hit me harder than the acquisition announcement, harder than the newspaper articles or the congratulatory phone calls. They came from my brother, not from external validation or social recognition, but from family finally seeing me for who I'd always been. Thanks, David. That means everything. 3 weeks after the wedding, I found myself sitting across from David at Elliot's Oyster House, the Space Needle visible through rain-streaked windows as we waited for our lunch to arrive. He'd chosen the restaurant, somewhere neutral, he'd said, where we could talk without the weight of family expectations pressing down on us. I've been thinking about that night a lot, David said, swirling the wine in his glass. About your speech, about how I never really knew what you were building all these years. I tried to tell you, both of you, really. But every conversation seemed to circle back to your latest case, your partnership track, your bright future with Sarah's family. David winced. I remember some of those conversations now. You'd start to explain something about your business, and I'd interrupt with some story about Court or Sarah's family connections. He shook his head. I was an ass, Marcus, a completely self-absorbed ass. We both were focused on our own paths. That's generous, but we both know it's not true. I was focused on my path. You were trying to share yours, and I wasn't listening. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Tell me now, really tell me, how did you build something worth $37 million while I was busy congratulating myself on making partner? So I told him about the late nights in my spare bedroom, teaching myself coding languages and digital marketing strategies, about my first client, a family-owned furniture store whose owner was desperate to compete with online retailers, about the slow process of building relationships, proving value, expanding services, about the moment I realized I could help traditional businesses not just survive digital transformation, but thrive because of it. The furniture store owner, Mr. Peterson, he became my first real advocate, I explained. After we increased his online sales by 400% in 6 months, he started referring other business owners. That's how I learned that success in this industry isn't about flashy marketing or clever algorithms. It's about understanding that every business owner is terrified of being left behind by technology they don't understand. David listened intently, asking questions that showed he was genuinely trying to comprehend not just the mechanics of my business, but the passion behind it. So you're essentially a translator, he said finally. You help traditional business owners understand how to use new tools without losing what made them successful in the first place. Exactly. And the beautiful thing is, once they understand, they become incredibly loyal clients. Small businesses that have worked with me for 6 years, manufacturing companies that trust me to handle their entire digital presence, family restaurants that doubled their revenue during the pandemic because we'd prepared them for online ordering and delivery. That's why Hendrix wanted to acquire you, not just for the current revenue, but for the client relationships you've built, and for the systems I've developed to scale those relationships. We have processes now that can onboard new clients efficiently while maintaining the personal touch that makes small business owners feel heard and understood. David raised his wine glass. To my brother, who built an empire while I was learning to argue in court. We clinked glasses, and I felt something shift between us, not just recognition, but genuine respect. For the first time in our adult lives, we were meeting as equals, two men who'd chosen different paths and found their own versions of success. There's something else, David said, setting down his glass. Sarah and I have been talking about starting a family soon, and when that happens, I want our kids to know their Uncle Marcus. Really know you, not just see you at holiday dinners where everyone's performing their roles. The idea of being a real presence in my future nieces' and nephews' lives brought unexpected emotion to my throat. I'd like that too. Good, because I have a feeling you're going to be the uncle with the cool job and the interesting stories, the one who teaches them about building things that matter. When I returned to my office that afternoon, I found my assistant, Maria, fielding calls with barely contained excitement. 3 more interview requests, she announced, including one from Forbes about Seattle's emerging tech leaders. And James Hendricks called personally to schedule your one-on-one meeting for next week. The Forbes interview. 6 months ago, the idea would have been laughable. Now it felt like the natural progression of a story that was finally being told correctly. There's something else, Maria continued, handing me a handwritten letter. This came by messenger about an hour ago. The return address was my parents' house, written in my mother's careful script. I opened it to find a letter that must have taken her hours to compose. Dear Marcus, your father and I have been thinking a lot since Saturday night about things we should have said years ago and attention we should have paid. We realize now that we were so focused on David's path, the one that looked familiar to us, that reminded us of our own dreams, that we missed watching you create something entirely new. We never understood your business because we never took the time to understand it. We never celebrated your achievements because we were waiting for them to look like achievements we recognized. We failed you as parents, and we're sorry. But more than sorry, we're proud. Proud of the man you became without our encouragement, proud of the success you built without our support, proud of the grace you showed at David's wedding when you could have been bitter. We know we can't undo 34 years of overlooking you, but we'd like to try to do better. Would you be willing to teach us about your business, your world, your vision for the future? We want to understand who our son really is. Love, Mom and Dad. P.S. Mrs. Patterson's son, the investment banker, says what you've accomplished is extraordinary. We should have known that without him telling us. I read the letter twice, my eyes blurring slightly on the second pass. It wasn't a perfect apology. There were still undertones of external validation, still references to other people's recognition of my success. But it was genuine, and it was a beginning. That Sunday, I drove to my childhood home in Bellevue for the first time in 8 months. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the carefully maintained lawn and begonias somehow diminished by my new perspective. But when my parents opened the door, something had changed in their faces, a mixture of nervous anticipation and genuine curiosity that I'd never seen directed at me before. Marcus, honey, come in. Your father cleared his study so you could show us your presentation. My mother's voice carried an excitement usually reserved for David's visits. The study had indeed been transformed. My father's golf magazines moved aside to make room for my laptop and the printed materials I'd brought to explain my business. They sat on either side of me, leaning forward with the attention of students preparing for a final exam. I started with the basics, what digital transformation meant, why traditional businesses needed help navigating online markets, how customer behavior had changed over the past decade. My parents asked questions, real questions, about client relationships and revenue models and competitive advantages. So when you say digital transformation, my father said, taking notes in a legal pad like he was preparing for a board meeting, you're not just building websites, you're helping businesses fundamentally change how they operate. Exactly. A restaurant doesn't just need online ordering. They need inventory management systems that sync with their suppliers, customer data platforms that help them understand eating patterns, social media strategies that build community around their brand. My mother was nodding slowly. And that's why your clients stay with you for years, because you're not just a vendor, you're a partner in their success. Mom, that's exactly right. For 3 hours, we talked about my business with an intensity and focus I'd never experienced with my parents. They wanted to understand not just what I did, but why it mattered, how I developed my expertise, what my vision was for the future under Hendricks' ownership. We have something to tell you too, my father said as we finished looking at my client case studies. We've been talking to a financial advisor about retirement planning, not because we're planning to retire soon, but because we realize we don't know how to handle having a son who's... He struggled for the word. Wealthy? I supplied. Successful beyond anything we imagined, my mother corrected. We want to make sure we don't burden you with expectations or assumptions about what your success means for the family. The conversation that followed was awkward but necessary. They wanted to establish boundaries, to make clear that they didn't expect financial support or access to my business connections. They wanted our relationship to be about family, not about money or social advancement. We failed you once by not recognizing your worth, my father said. We don't want to fail you again by treating you like an ATM or a trophy. As I drove back to Seattle that evening, I reflected on how different this conversation was from the one I'd imagined having with my parents. I'd expected them to want something from me: financial support, social connections, reflected glory. Instead, they'd wanted to understand me, to finally see the person I'd been all along. The following Tuesday, James Hendricks flew up from San Francisco for our one-on-one strategy session. We met at his request in my current office, surrounded by the remnants of Chen Digital Solutions before it became part of something larger. I want to understand your vision for the Pacific Northwest Division, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Not just the business plan we discussed during acquisition talks, but your personal vision for what we can build together. I'd prepared for this conversation, but James's directness still caught me off guard. I think we have the opportunity to become the definitive digital transformation partner for traditional businesses across the region. Not just Seattle, but Portland, Spokane, Boise, anywhere there are established companies that need help adapting to digital markets. Tell me more. The Pacific Northwest has thousands of family-owned businesses that have been operating the same way for decades. Lumber companies, agricultural businesses, manufacturers, retailers. They're profitable, they're stable, but they're terrified of digital disruption. We can be their bridge to the future. James leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with the same intensity I'd seen during our initial meetings. What do you need to make that vision reality? Talent. I want to hire the best digital strategists, developers, and client relationship managers in the region. I want to poach people from Amazon and Microsoft who are tired of working on abstract problems and want to help real businesses solve real challenges. Budget for talent acquisition? $15 million over the next 2 years. I know it sounds aggressive, but if we're going to be the market leader, we need to move fast and hire the best people before our competitors figure out what we're doing. James smiled, the expression of a man who just heard exactly what he'd hoped to hear. Marcus, that's exactly the kind of thinking that made us want to acquire your company. You're not just thinking about incremental growth, you're thinking about market dominance. I've spent 8 years watching big consulting firms treat small business owners like they're stupid because they don't understand technology. I want to build something that respects their intelligence while helping them adapt to a changing world. We spent the next 3 hours diving into specifics, hiring strategies, market expansion timelines, partnership opportunities with regional business organizations. By the end of the meeting, I had approval for the talent acquisition budget and a mandate to triple our client base over the next 18 months. As James prepared to leave, he paused at my office door. Marcus, I've been doing acquisitions for 20 years, and I've learned to recognize the difference between entrepreneurs who built something by accident and entrepreneurs who built something with purpose. You're clearly the latter. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me in 2 years when you've turned the Pacific Northwest Division into our most profitable regional operation. That evening, I called Jennifer into my office to share the news about our expansion plans and budget approval. Her reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. $15 million for talent acquisition? Marcus, do you realize what that means? We can hire anyone we want. We can build the dream team we've been talking about for 3 years. That's the idea. I want you to start reaching out to your contacts at the big tech companies. Let them know we're hiring senior-level people for a company that actually values work-life balance and meaningful client relationships. I'll start making calls tomorrow. But Marcus, there's something else we need to discuss. Her tone had shifted, becoming more serious. What's on your mind? Your ex-wife called this morning. Emma, she said she saw the news about the acquisition and wanted to congratulate you. She asked if you might be willing to have coffee sometime to catch up. Emma. I hadn't spoken to her since our divorce was finalized 2 years ago, though I occasionally saw her LinkedIn updates about her marketing career. The idea of reconnecting with her now, when my life had changed so dramatically, brought a complex mixture of emotions. What did you tell her? That I'd pass along the message and you'd decide whether or not to reach out. Jennifer paused. For what it's worth, she sounded genuinely happy about your success. Not like someone who wants something from you, but like someone who always believed you'd find your way. That night, I found Emma's contact information and stared at her number for 20 minutes before finally sending a text. Jennifer told me you called. Would love to catch up over coffee if you're free this week. Her response came within minutes. How about Thursday at Victrola on Capitol Hill? 2 p.m.? And Marcus, congratulations. I always knew you were building something special. Thursday afternoon found me sitting in the same coffee shop where Emma and I had had our first date 5 years earlier. She arrived precisely on time, looking polished and confident in a way that suggested her own career had flourished since our divorce. Marcus, she smiled, and I was struck by how genuine it seemed. You look good. Success suits you. Thanks. You look great too. I've been following your work on LinkedIn. The campaign you did for that outdoor gear company was brilliant. We ordered coffee and found a quiet table near the windows. The awkwardness I'd expected, replaced by something that felt almost like the easy conversation we'd once shared. I have to ask, Emma said, stirring honey into her latte. How does it feel, going from the overlooked Chen brother to selling your company for $37 million? I laughed, surprised by her directness. Surreal, validating, terrifying, all of the above. I remember when you were building the company in our spare bedroom. You'd work until 2 in the morning, then get up at 6 to handle client calls before your day job. I used to worry you were going to burn yourself out. You never said that, because I could see how much it meant to you, how alive you looked when you talked about helping businesses transform themselves. I knew you were building something important, even when your family couldn't see it. The conversation that followed was easier than I'd expected. Emma talked about her own career growth, her recent promotion to senior director at a major marketing firm, her engagement to a fellow marketing executive I'd met briefly at industry events. I'm happy for you, I told her, and meant it. Tom seems like a good guy. He is. And Marcus? I'm glad things worked out for you. I always felt guilty about the divorce, like I was giving up on you right before you broke through. Emma, we both know the divorce was the right decision. We were growing in different directions, and I was too wrapped up in proving myself to be the partner you deserved. Maybe, but I also think I wasn't patient enough with your process. I wanted you to find your confidence faster than you were ready to. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. I'm glad you found it eventually. As we prepared to leave, Emma paused at the door. There's something else I wanted to tell you. Your speech at David's wedding. I wasn't there, obviously, but Sarah told me about it. She said it was one of the most powerful moments she's ever witnessed, not just because of the money, but because of how you claimed your place in your family. Sarah said that? She said you taught her something about standing up for yourself with grace, about how quiet strength can be more powerful than loud demands for attention. Driving home from coffee with Emma, I reflected on how much had changed in the month since David's wedding. Not just the external circumstances, the acquisition, the media attention, the family recognition, but something deeper. I'd stopped waiting for other people to validate my worth and started believing in it myself. My phone buzzed with a call from David. Marcus, I hope you don't mind, but I gave your number to Judge Harrison, Sarah's uncle from the wedding. He's been talking to some colleagues about you, and they're interested in discussing a potential consulting project. What kind of project? Federal court system modernization. Apparently, they've been struggling with digital case management systems, and someone mentioned your name as someone who helps traditional institutions adapt to new technology. I smiled, remembering Judge Harrison's reaction to my announcement at the wedding reception. I'd be happy to discuss it with him. Great. And Marcus? Sarah and I were thinking about having you over for dinner soon. Nothing formal, just the three of us. She wants to hear more about your expansion plans with Hendrix. I'd like that. After we hung up, I realized that this was what success really looked like. Not just the money or the recognition, but the opportunity to build the relationships and do the work that had always mattered to me. For 34 years, I'd been trying to earn my place in other people's stories. Now, I was finally writing my own. The rain continued its steady rhythm against my windows, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely at peace with the sound. Change was coming, had already arrived, and I was ready for whatever came next. Outside my windows, Seattle glittered with possibility, a city where quiet determination could build empires and whispered ambitions could become roaring success stories. I'd spent 34 years learning that lesson, and now I was finally ready to live it. The transformation was complete, but the real journey was just beginning.